Hey, I want to welcome everybody to our exponential webinar. My name is Dave Ferguson, and I'll tell you what, I just consider it a privilege to be able to lead Exponential. Our mission at Exponential is what we call the 16% mission, where we would love to see 16% of all churches in the United States become reproducing or multiplying churches. And why are we so passionate about church planting? One reason is we know it's the best evangelistic tool that we have. And secondly, we also know through a Harvard longitudinal study that when people are engaged in church, it's probably the most significant factor in their own human flourishing. So it both helps people find and follow Jesus, but allows communities to flourish when there's brand new churches. And that's why I want to see 16% of all churches involved in that important part of the Jesus mission. So I want to welcome everybody. I'm telling you what, you are in for a great webinar today, because I know a lot of you out there, you're navigating things where, you're feeling fatigue, feeling some disruption, feeling some uncertainty about the future. But the good news is that change can also be a soil where multiplication takes root. And what if the future of your church isn't just about surviving, but really about multiplying? And we're going to draw from a terrific book called The Future Focused Church. And the authors, we're going to spend the next 45 minutes to an hour together and really kind of take a look at the future. And I'm excited to introduce our panel because these are people who have the ability to kind of see around the corner what's coming next, or kind of look over the horizon and say, hey, here's what you should anticipate. And we need these kind of people speaking into our lives. And I would encourage this to not just be you listening to them, but you have the opportunity to ask them questions. So you'll notice at the bottom there, there's a little Q&A. You can drop some questions in there. Feel free to do that. We'll try to get to as many of them as we possibly can. So as you're hearing things or thinking things, or maybe you've even started in the book or read the book and you have questions about it, drop those questions in there. We'll try to get to some of those. But let me introduce our panel. This is going to be fun. Um, we have with us Kara Powell, and Kara is the Chief of Leadership Formation at Fuller Theological Seminary. She's also the Executive Director for the Fuller Youth Institute and the founder of 10 by 10 Collaborative, and was named by Christianity Today as one of 50 women to watch, and a prolific author. We also have with us Jake Mulder. Jake is the Assistant Chief of Leadership Formation at Fuller Seminary, a Senior Advisor for the Fuller Youth Institute and 10 by 10 Collaborative, and is one of the co-authors of Growing Young, which, if you haven't read that book, you really, it's been out for a while now, but it's still a worthwhile read. I would encourage you to do it. It was super helpful to me. And we also have with us Ray Chang, who's the Executive Director of the 10 by 10 Collaborative. And part of their vision is really towards, they want to see 10 million, imagine this, 10 million young people over 10 years, and they want to reach them with the gospel. And then in his spare time, he's also the president of the Asian American Christian Collaborative. Ray and I live in the same city, Chicago, which I think we both believe is becoming really a ministry destination for young people as they seek to kind of get involved in kingdom ministry. So I'll tell you what, let's jump in here. And I'm going to start with you, Kara, if that's okay. Um, the opening line of the book, again, Future Focused Church, is you say the best days of the church are ahead. Now, I don't know if you have positivity in your strength finders, because I do. So that sounds like something I might say. But I want to know beyond the positivity, why are you convinced that's true?
Yeah, it's great to be with you all, Dave. And we're such fans of Exponential that we're honored to have this discussion with y'all. We were really intentional, Jake, Ray, and I, in making that the very first line of the book. The best days of the church are ahead. We 100% believe that. Why? I'll start because of God. We believe in a God who's always redeeming, always working, always transforming, sometimes even when we can't see it. So while we're not naive about the challenges that pastors are facing, many churches are shrinking, many pastors are dedicated but drained, we know that God is continuing to work and transform. I think the other reason that I'm particularly optimistic about the church is because of what we see in young people. I have so much hope for what we're seeing in Gen Z and Gen Alpha behind them, teenagers, young adults. They are hungry for Jesus. They are hungry for Jesus, but they're hesitant about organized religion. So this is a real opportunity for us to build trust and to develop the kind of adult relationships that young people actually crave.
I'll tell you, Kara, too, and I don't know if you want to comment on this too, because I got a chance to spend in May. I was 5 weeks in Europe, and I know you're aware of like what they're calling the quiet revival that started,
Yeah.
and really kind of a tidal wave. I think the last time we had our webinar, Christine Kane was on with us, and Christine, I mean, she'll be in 30 countries, and she says, no, this is not just happening in the UK; it's really happening really across all the Western world. Does any of that also contribute to kind of your optimism about the future?
Yeah, absolutely. You're so right. Young people are really leading the way when it comes to the sparks of revival we're seeing outside of the US as well as inside of the US. One of the really exciting frontiers inside the US is college campuses. College campuses, whether it's InterVarsity, Crew, other ministries, they're seeing really a surge of student interest. I'm on the board of InterVarsity, and one of my favorite stories from last year was a staff member who showed up at the very first large group meeting, and she thought she was in the wrong room because there were 120 college students there, and only 20 had been in her chapter the year before. But no, that many college students came because of what they saw on social media and flyers for a Bible study. And we're hearing stories like that, spontaneous water baptisms, camps selling out, the young people bringing their friends to Jesus. So yeah, college campuses are especially exciting these days.
I'll tell you what, I hope church leaders are really listening to this because I do think this is what Mark Sayers, he's saying it's not really so much a revival that it's like the church has been so on fire. We're going out and reach people. He's saying it's really an awakening
Yeah.
that's happening within young people. They're looking for something and now they're showing up at our university, at our church. So I think what we're going to get here for the next hour is, okay, what do we do?
Yep.
This is a part of the future. So, hey Ray, talk to us a little bit because we got kind of the best is yet to come from Kara. What are some of the challenges? All
Yeah,
right.
and we and we do and we do believe that the best is yet to come, but we're also very sober minded about the current state of young people in the church. You know, Kara mentioned that U.S. Christian leaders are dedicated and drained. You know, according to the Epic multi-year study, over half of religious leaders seriously consider leaving pastoral ministry, and we're seeing a challenge in the pipelines for ministry leaders. We're finding that across the country. We also know that churches are getting smaller and not bigger, where median worship has declined from 137 in people to 75 people from the years of 2000 to 2023. We know that the number of Christians in the U.S. is shrinking and not growing. That figure in 2007 was 78% of the U.S. population identifying as Christian, but dropping to 63% in 2021, and then is projected by the Pew Research Center to be below 50% by 2070. The nuns are a rapidly rising group continuously. There's the lack of credibility and the mistrust that young people have with institutions. According to Springtide, one of the things that they found was that 13 to 25-year-olds are almost 3 times likely to say that they've been hurt by organized religion, as they trust organized religion than trusting organized religion. And hypocrisy, moral failures, and unkindness have really earned a lack of trust. And you know, one of the leaders that we interviewed, like Vince, his name is Vince, a senior pastor of a rural small congregation just shared that, I know God has called me to this work in this church, but I honestly don't know that our discipleship efforts in the last decade have made a tangible difference because people seem more divided than ever. And so we're seeing a lot of different layered reasons why, you know, we have some work to do.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you. I mean, so there you have it. I mean, and kind of just in a few minutes. I mean, I think Kara's given you, hey, here is the very possible, preferable future, and what young people there is something they're looking for. And Ray's kind of, I think, so remindedly kind of told us, no, here's the situation the church currently is, and so I'll tell you what. Let's jump, Jake, because I know one of the things you say in the book is you don't want the church to go the way of Blockbuster. All right. Um, if we have some younger members in the audience, remind them what Blockbuster is, and then explain what you mean by that and why it's urgent for the church right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I could jump in. I'm thinking those who are tech-minded have already jumped on to AI, Google, Instagram, TikTok, whatever is their chosen platform. But yeah, Blockbuster was, and I'll say barely still is, a
I think
movie
there is. I think
rental
there's still one
store.
store like in the. Is that right? Am I right about
We've
that?
we've made a pilgrimage to the one Blockbuster in Bend, Oregon. Yes, we have been there before and have photos of it. But if you rewind, I don't know, 15 years ago or so, I just hit 40, and this is still in my like experience even as a young adult. If you wanted to rent a movie, Blockbuster dominated the industry. They were the place. There were certainly other video stores, but they were the main place that if you wanted to rent a movie, and I have pretty positive memories of going to a Blockbuster and seeing the new release, and there's like 20 shelves of that new release, and you had to get the physical DVD or VHS or whatever it was that you wanted to rent if you wanted to watch a movie. And there's times where you want to watch a certain movie and it's sold out. So, okay, we're gonna have to come back tomorrow and hope that it's been returned.
And
Well,
tell everybody what happened if you didn't return it on time.
oh, when you get your late fees and all that, man, late fees is a whole nother reality. But along comes this upstart, named Netflix that a few people on this call have maybe heard of that completely disrupts the industry. And today you've got, yeah, you already named it. You took our punchline, Dave. There's one blockbuster left
Well,
in the
sorry,
United States
my
that we're
bad.
aware of, and Netflix has become a multi-billion-dollar company. And so the moral of the story is not everything's going online, so your church has to do everything online, right? That's not the moral of the story that we're trying to focus on. What we are trying to focus on is people are watching movies as much now as they ever have. Like the movie industry has not gone anywhere. The way in which people engage with movies, access them, the way that movies are distributed, those things are what is updated. So we want to be heard clearly on this. We would say the gospel is never going to change. And there are some very, very important elements of the church that we can unpack throughout this conversation that absolutely should never change. While our gospel message is never going to change, it's the methods that deserve ongoing evaluation, adaptation. So, as Kara outlines, yes, the best days can be ahead, and Ray outlines all these challenges. We think this can be an amazing moment for the church, for leaders, for ministries to say, all right, so what's up for renegotiation? And we've done the work to unpack that by studying a lot of church leaders on how do you do that work. So that's our sense of Blockbuster, Dave.
Oh, good illustration. So Kara, you guys did the homework as you always do in all your efforts. I think it was more than 1,000 churches you did the research with.
Yeah, that we've been journeying with, absolutely.
So, and I think you kind of pared it down to like what you're calling three checkpoints that you'd say are essential for churches as we kind of move into this future together. We're going to take everybody over the horizon or around the corner into the better future. What are those three checkpoints?
Yeah, absolutely. They're embedded in our very definition of what a future focused church is. So maybe I can give that definition, then explain the checkpoints. So we define a future focused church as a group of Jesus followers who seek God's direction together. That's kind of the core phrase of the definition of a future focused church. So notice it's a group, it's not an individual pastor or leader, and committed to seeking God's direction together. Now, when we continue the definition, we do name these 3 points, and we say, especially in the 3 areas that we see are extra important for churches to prioritize now. And that is relationally discipling young people, modeling kingdom diversity, and tangibly loving our neighbor. And
So
we,
go ahead and give those again for everybody.
yep,
I'd love for those to really just kind of sink into their head, but also,
yeah.
what are they again?
Yeah,
Okay.
relationally discipling young people. So prioritizing young people, investing in young people, and really building relationship with them. Secondly is modeling kingdom diversity. And we're not saying that because of any woke or politically correct agenda. We're saying it because of what we see in scripture and how all people are created in God's image. And our country is getting more and more diverse. And we want to reflect that in the communities in our country, including in our churches. So really pursuing the diversity that's in our communities And then thirdly, tangibly loving our neighbors. This is how the church tends to grow and expand. You talk about 16%, Dave, and the church becoming more of a multiplier. We'll do that as we're really loving our neighbors. And so much of the book revolves around those three checkpoints and how to make change in them. Now, having said that, the method that we outline in the book, it works for any change that you want to make, whether you want your congregation or ministry to become more prayerful or think more globally, whatever it might be. But those three, young people, kingdom diversity, and loving our neighbor, those are particularly salient in our research and scripture and what churches need today.
Very good. I'll tell you what, we got a question that came in here, and Jake, I'm gonna ask you to kind of
Sure.
think through this one. Guy says, I think it's a guy. I don't know why I think it's a guy, but for some reason I do. It says anonymous attendee. We'll see what happens.
Ooh, that could get you in trouble there, Dave.
I know. I thought I saw a name. I'm a boomer in my church. I've been active member there for over 50 years, and we've seen decline in numbers, especially since the pandemic. But except for the elderly who've passed on to their reward in heaven, many are still faithful attendees. But it seems that our church leadership, mostly the younger 30, 40 something, seem to think that doing stuff to attempt to attract young families is their best way forward. And a few of the older members are beginning to feel a little left out, not enough to make them leave yet, but who knows? Are there best practices around working to attract members? And I think he's talking about younger members who are primarily young families without making the old timers feel like they're being passed by. Um, I know the book, so I think he's kind of throwing you a softball here because I think you outlined 4 steps, really, didn't you?
Yep.
About like here's how you can do exactly this. So
Yeah.
talk
No,
about it.
I'll take the softball, and I'm going to give very short answer, and then I'll give a little bit longer answer. The very, very short answer is needing to choose between generations. Is it this generation or that generation? Would not be our recommendation or what we think is most faithful. We are huge proponents of intergenerational ministry, which means it's actually through the love, care, support, investment of our oldest members, discovering their gifts, allowing them to step in, to mentor, to invest is part of the way that we're going to support and incorporate the next generation. Now, that's much easier said than done. So if you want a movie that can inspire you, go watch the movie Up. For anybody, we talked about Blockbuster already, so I'm going to stick on the movie train. But like, watch the movie Up. It'll give you an operating playbook for your church. Just trust me on that one. The slightly longer answer, Dave, is yeah, we have found that while the checkpoints outline some ideas on what should change, the process of how we go about that change is much more difficult. And according to Harvard Business Review, about 70% of all change efforts fail. So the reality that many churches may not do this well is alive and well. So our approach, you mentioned that we're thorough, we operate through research. We've taken 1,000 churches through a year-long change experience, and we were paying attention to those churches to see, we don't think there's any easy formula or step-by-step process of change, but we were curious, like, what are the reliable patterns? Are there any common themes that we can discern? And really what we saw is there are 4 that really stand out. So I'll offer those 4 here. They're grounded in 4 different words. I wish I had like a little whiteboard to draw. I'm going to use hand motions. But the first thing is that these churches understand here or their current reality, and they take the time to discern here. They take the time to understand there. That's the future destination, or what we would say where God is leading. They're very intentional about who is shaping that journey. And then after engaging in that work, they engage in the actual how work of change. So to give those 4, here, there, who, and how. And we found that in any change process, all 4 of those matter. Here's part of the reason. We've come across some churches when they're thinking about the change that they want to make. So I'm going to go back to this, like, well, are we engaging young families? Or are we engaging older members? What does that look like? Most of us, our knee-jerk reaction is to go into how mode. We start making decisions. There's one church that we worked with and learned about. They wanted to attract young adults. They got a group of 50 and 60-year-olds together to say, well, what do today's young adults want? And that group concluded, young adults probably want a Sunday evening service. So they started a Sunday evening service. The challenge is hardly any young adults came to that Sunday evening service. So the group said, okay, we jumped immediately into next steps. Let's actually pause. Let's invite some young adults to be part of the who, right? That discernment team. And then let's actually walk through, well, what is our church doing well right now? Where do we think God may be leading us in the future? And by walking that process, they ended up understanding, well, what the young adults in that church wanted were mentoring, were support, some child care, maybe from some baby boomers who are interested in helping out and being kind of part of an extended family for that church. So it's walking through that who, the here, the there, the who, and the how. We call those the 4 zones of change, Dave. And anytime that a church will actually tease those apart and walk through those well, we find 9 times out of 10 the church is making a much more life-giving, thriving, holistic set of decisions.
That's super helpful, and I hope you do pick up the book, because when you pick up the book, I mean, they have, like, there's a graphic that really clearly lays that out, and it's almost intuitive the way it gets explained. Hey, Jake, I'm going to keep you on here.
Yep.
Cameron's got a question too, and it kind of deals somewhat with this. Cameron typed this question, says, "What's one step to take to engage the power brokers of the church?" And they said, in my context, they are baby boomers and but they're not necessarily in leadership positions. So the power brokers who seem to have unspoken control over the direction of the church.
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to this idea of who, because so Simon Sinek has a book, Start with Why. Like, we're a fan of that, and we understand the context in which Simon Sinek is writing that. In churches, we would actually encourage you to start with who when you're encountering a big challenge. And it goes back to that idea. People tend to just jump into how mode. What's my tangible next step? How fast can I move forward? What do I do? And we ended up encountering all of these churches who spent a year going through a change experience. And when we really unpacked it and thought and looked at, okay, at the end of that year, or in many cases, we looped back to them like a year or two after they had done that change experience. And we said, help us understand what actually helped you land in the right place. Time and time again, they went back to, they started with the right group of people or the right who. So, okay, back to engaging that group of power players and what is the right way to do it. We start to outline in the book the idea of putting together a transformation team. And we talk about the importance of having a diverse team. We find the best teams don't end up swinging to one side of the pendulum or the other. I think we've worked with a lot of like youth ministry people, young adult people, and it's easy for that group to say, well, we're going to get a group of our friends together who look like us, think like us, want to move fast, want to work with young people. Or we've ended up working with elders and deacons who may be on the, we'll say, more seasoned side of life, or the more, they've got power authority. We find the best teams and the best decisions take place when you actually get those people together, at least when we're talking about a complex challenge in the team. The challenge in that, Dave, is, well, if I start working with people who think differently than me, who want to see things operate differently, it goes slower. It can be more frustrating. And when we're used to, in our churches, moving quickly with those who look like us, think like there are things that are so much easier about that. The challenge is it doesn't form a well-rounded team. It doesn't help us make as wise of decisions. So those would be a few directions to think through that way.
And if let me just encourage people listening to, I'm telling you, this is wisdom. Having pastored for a very long time. But let me ask you, Jake, I want to keep moving on, but I do want to
Yep, no, please.
So specifically, let's say I'm doing this in my church, and I put together the diverse team. Two questions. How public is it? Like, hey, here's the team, and then how much, I'm just going to name it, how much power, how much authority do you give them? Does that make sense?
Yep, I'll jump in with 2 pieces there. I think everything is situational. We offer some tools in the book to discern that situation. We are huge fans of experimenting from the edges. And when we say experimenting from the edges, if you've developed a banner, a logo, a website, a theme song, and you roll it out on a Sunday morning, you have lost all of your ability to try something and learn along the way. So again, while everything needs to fit the situation, the more that you can try some early experiments and learn your way into it, the better. And Dave, sorry, give me your second question again.
And the second was, so yeah, I asked, do you make it public so everybody goes, okay, these are the people that are on that team? And then secondly, how much authority do you give them? I mean, do they get to make the final decision? Do they bring it to whoever is where the buck stops, whether it's the lead team or the elders? How much authority do you
Yeah,
give them?
great question. One of the concepts we talk about is we want the authority to fit the responsibility. And oftentimes we find those two things are outmatched. Sometimes people have an incredible amount of responsibility, but they don't have the authority to carry it forward. We've seen that with those who work with or advocate for young people. And the church leadership might say, we want to be more intergenerational. We need to have more. And oftentimes a person who's youth pastor, young adult pastor, volunteers with that age group, they may be tasked with that responsibility. They don't have the authority to carry that forward because all we see this sometimes with, say, a younger youth pastor who is supposed to equip and train parents. There's a lot of authority and a lot of cultural understanding that youth leader may have. They might be missing the experience that they need to understand parenting teenagers. So, pairing that younger person with someone who has more age, wisdom, and authority. We've also seen the flip side happen, Dave, where you get all the power brokers together. They've got significant authority, but they are not in touch with some of the on the ground decisions that need to be made. So we like putting together a team that's a mix. You're going to hear from us a lot of things that we hold in tension. On the one hand, we are a huge fan of the priesthood of all believers. We think all Christians in the church are not meant to kind of splash around in the shallow end, but to carry authority and responsibility. On the other hand, we are fans of good order and clear leadership, and we think God calls those people. So, standing within that tension, often if you can get the right group of people together, they'll help you navigate that tension well.
All right, there you go. I don't know how much you guys charge to hire you as consultants, but you guys are all getting this for free, so you should be taking notes. This is awesome stuff.
I come to Chicago for the right deep dish pizza. I had Giordano's myself on Monday, Dave, so I don't want to offend anyone in Chicago who has preferences. But yes, we do that sort of thing.
Politically savvy, mentioning both Giordano's and Lou Malnati's at the same time. Very good. Hey, Ray, so we had another question here from anonymous attendee who is asking this. What are some practical changes churches need to make to engage well with the youth in a Netflix world? So, I mean, if you could back up a little bit, draw on the research, 1,000+ churches that you guys are journeying with, what advice do you have for them as they try to move into this better future?
I mean, I think on the one hand, we have to have a clear sense of what's real, what's actually taking place. And so taking some time to actually listen to young people and hearing what they're struggling with, what they're wondering about, what they're facing, what they're asking is going to be really important, because oftentimes there's a big chasm between what they actually are thinking or processing through and what we believe them to be processing through or thinking about. But the other piece is to actually focus on what kind of culture is being created within the community. One of the most well-known phrases is that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And culture is what you repeatedly do and what you actually embrace as normal. And in our research, what we included was a diversity in terms of generations, the denominations, church sizes from 50 to 5,000 people, and then of course ethnic and racial diversity. And one of the things that we offer is this 4-zone map from that Jake mentioned earlier. But we really want churches and church leaders to really have a God-seeking culture. And that's really at the heart of what it means to be a future-focused church. It's a group of Jesus followers who seek God's direction together. And a big part of doing things together is listening to one another, hearing, the different perspectives that are there. Oftentimes you'll see patterns along generational lines or along racial and ethnic lines, along gender lines. And it's the necessary work to discern what God's vision for the future is for that community. And so knowing that today we experience such a disruptive society, we find that predictability has been replaced with constant pivoting, and we want people to find the right balance between the two. I mean, Dave, you and I are more on the entrepreneurial side. We've never had a bad idea. No such thing as an impossible, reality. And so, finding the right balance between that and people like Jake, for example, and Kara, who are both and
There is a balance. What are
visionary
you
as
talking
well.
about?
Yeah. And so, we want to make sure that we're bringing all the right people together for this.
That's good. Hey, I want to keep you on here, Ray. We got a question from Randall, and because you up front, you kind of gave us all the challenges, and I think he's going to push back a little bit. So I'd love to hear your response on it. He's saying, "I'm a fourth generation pastor, 56 years old. I really appreciate the great info." So he's digging everything he's hearing here. But here's the question. The question comes from a point that was mentioned about youth being hungry for Jesus but hesitant about organized church religion, and the broader quote, lack of trust in organized church. Randall says, from my perspective as a pastor, would it be fair to say that while some younger generations do express that sentiment, part of it may stem from a cultural narrative that, quote, organized religion can't be trusted rather than from their own personal experiences? In other words, not all who give that response can actually point to something in their own story that has shaped it. Is that a fair perspective?
I mean, I think the answer is it depends. You're always going to find people that deviate from the research and deviate from the statistics. And so some people will probably hear things and adopt those views as their own, even though they personally haven't experienced it. But, all the major research and all the major reporting seem to suggest that, the credibility of the institutional church is something that people are concerned about. And so and it's leading to people walking away. But one of the things that really stood out to me in one of the Pew Research reports was that they basically said that the visible rise of people disaffiliating from the faith will actually give permission to others if they want to leave as well. And so whether they're finding it irrelevant or untrustworthy, we don't know all the time, but the trajectory seems to be concerning enough for us to at least pay attention to.
So what I'm hearing you say, Ray, is that Randall might be right, that maybe it's not always their personal story. It's a cultural narrative they've picked up and they've kind of spewed out, but it really doesn't matter because the results are the same, that there is this drift that's happening away from the church and away from
Yeah. And let me give you a great example of how this kind of plays out sometimes. I talk to churches all over, and in some pockets throughout the country, they're like, we don't see anything wrong, everything is fine, we're growing, there's no challenges. And when you look around them, the reason that they're growing is because other churches are dying. And what we're finding is that, especially like, for example, within the Korean American community, there are a certain number of churches that exist, and because their English ministries, for example, are shutting down, these second generation or so, like US born, primarily English speaking churches are finding their kind of numbers to increase, and they're like, well, we're seeing quote unquote revival. There's not a challenge with our church. And on the larger scale of things, it's actually a net loss because people aren't always finding themselves in another church. They're actually completely leaving the church altogether.
And one of the things we say a lot at Exponential too is it's really not about my castle, it's about God's kingdom. And this is what we're saying. Here's what's happening in God's kingdom. And yeah, your little castle may be thriving right now, but let's examine what's going on in the bigger kingdom. I'm curious, I'll throw this out there because Jim Pollard asked it, and if we got any people that resonate with it, any of the three of you can jump in. If not, we'll move on. He just asked the question, are the authors familiar with James Emery White's culture conferences? And if so, where are the concepts of a future-focused church similar to his church and cultural teachings, and where do they differ? Are any of you familiar with his stuff? I'm getting no's.
No, I just Googled him, but I don't feel like I know enough to respond,
Okay,
unfortunately.
we'll keep
Sorry.
moving because we got lots of other stuff here. Hey, Kara, let's. The line I got you there, Kara. The what we talked about is the kind of the I think we call them 4 steps. Is that okay?
Zones.
Zones, that's a better way of saying it. 4 zones. How and around the here one, how can a church really come to understand its starting point, or we're here? I mean, and then basically it's like, what does it take to actually tell yourself the truth as a community?
Yeah, one of our beloved colleagues at Fuller Seminary, Scott Cormeau, teaches on leadership. And the first day in most classes, he either writes on a whiteboard or puts on a Zoom slide, leadership begins with listening. Leadership begins with listening. And that is really at the heart of knowing you're here, is listening to your people, listening to your broader community, and then also listening to God. So there was one church that said, hey, we are going to be very committed to listening. So they listened to God. They spent a lot of time in prayer, trying to discern how God was leading. They also listened to young people who said, we just don't feel very connected to the church. We feel like adults don't trust us. And so after this real intentional listening that the transformation team did, the whole church said, hey, we are going to prioritize listening to young people. We're gonna hand them the keys, and we're gonna let them lead us forward in new ways because we're listening to them. And so young people started volunteering across the church in all sorts of, I'll say, pretty typical ways, in children's ministry, with sound and AV and tech and social media and all that. And it was going so well that one of the adults in the church said to a young person, gosh, everything's happening so well, maybe you should preach a sermon sometime. And the high school student at that point looked at that adult and said, I would love to do that.
Oh.
And that was the fork in the road for that adult. Like, am I really going to listen and prioritize young people, or am I kind of giving that lip service? And praise the Lord, that adult chose the former. So he went to the senior pastor and said, hey, what do you think about this 16-year-old doing a sermon? Senior pastor was open to it. The parents were open to it. And so that high school student preached a fantastic sermon. That was one of the shortest sermons in record at that church, which nobody was complaining about. But the message that sent, not just to young people, but to all generations, that we're prioritizing young people, we're elevating them, we're listening to them. So leadership begins with listening. That's one of the most important steps any of us can take. And one last thought. I mean, we run into churches all the time who have developed ideas on what young people want. We're going to start a new young adult service or a college class or whatever it might be. And then they don't get the results that they were hoping for. When they come to us and we ask them, well, did you listen to young people? It's kind of stunning how many times the answer is like, well, no, not really. We just kind of replicated what we enjoyed when we were young people. So listening to today's young people and anybody else you're trying to serve, that's just paramount.
That's great. And again, yeah, you have your own gut instincts about, and you might even like Ray talked about, oh, we're fine here. Okay, I understand you feel that, but let's listen.
Yeah.
That's good. Hey, Jake, the next zone that is around who, what are a few of the key steps to forming this transformation team of the church's who? All right, if they're going to do that a church needs to really focus on in order to really move into the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to the idea of the transformation team, that's the core piece of what the who work looks like. And we would say, this webinar, you may be engaging this webinar by yourself. We think bringing about change, things should not just be you move on and determine whatever else you're going to do on your own, but you actually look for who else you are going to invite into this process. We think the vision, the next steps isn't just intended to be crafted by one individual in an afternoon or maybe on a late Saturday night before they offer their sermon on the next Sunday morning, but imagined, discerned by that community over a period of time. So to give a few simple steps of that, yeah, the transformation team, we just think it's a group of people who are dedicated to activating and advancing the change. We tend to find, based on the context that you're in, Dave, 5 to 12 people is a good size for that transformation team.
Why 5? Why 5 to 12?
Yeah, well, I mean, Jesus gives us 12 disciples, but part of that is based on our research. Part of it is just based on our experience that if you have 2, 3, or 4 people and you have a person or two who's missing from a meeting, you don't have a team anymore. You've got an individual. Group dynamics, we've just found if you get much higher than 12, it's hard to manage 20 people in a room. But if you've got 10, 12, you still have the diversity of viewpoints, but you can end up in a position where most people have a chance to contribute and feel heard.
And it's small enough you're going to make a decision and get some action.
Yeah, exactly. So certainly like defer to your denomination's polity or your theological conviction. But from practical reality, we found that that 5 to 12 number makes a pretty good group. Second, we would just say pursue diversity in that team. And when you hear diversity, if you think racial ethnic diversity, absolutely we mean racial ethnic diversity as fits your church and your community. But we're also thinking diversity in terms of age, cultures, viewpoints, backgrounds. And again, this is born out of our experience, but also some Harvard research, an article that just points to non-homogeneous teams end up being smarter. There are certain things that if you take a group of people all from the same age cohort or social location or economic background, there are things that we start to assume and just kind of look past, that the moment you bring in different viewpoints and someone says, well, we need to, and someone else who doesn't operate from that same perspective says, wait a second, why do we need to? And all of a sudden, you've got richness of discussion. It can go slower, it can be a bit bumpier, but you end up making better decisions. One quick example that we worked with a church in California. This church essentially had a young adult ministry that was very disconnected from the rest of the church, and they wanted to have the young adult ministry more incorporated into the life of the church. The pastor did not just say, hey, leader of our young adult ministry, you need to make this happen. The pastor said, this is not just a young people change that needs to happen. This is a church culture change that needs to happen. So the pastor worked with the person who led the young adult ministry. They hand selected some representatives from across the age spectrum, some people who are staff in the church, some people who are volunteers in the church. They ended up meeting over like a 12 to 18-month period. We interviewed this pastor a couple years after that they made that decision. And we asked the pastor, what do you think made the biggest difference in a healthy way, integrating young adults across the life of the church? And the pastor thought about it and he said, it's not any one sermon. It wasn't any one decision. He said, over time, we actually saw the culture of our church started to shift. And when we realized why it started to shift, it was because we had all of these different people and perspectives, and they went back and owned the collective decisions that we made in their area of ministry, right? So it's a little less intuitive, sometimes a little less direct, but having that diverse, multifaceted team really started to engage some of the changes that they needed. The last step that's included in what I already said, we find time and time again, people support what they help to create. People support what they help to create. And so the more, if you take someone who you're worried, are they going to buy into or be resistant to this vision? If there's a way you can incorporate them early on, one of my favorite examples of that, Dave, we do a fair amount of coaching with pastors overall, but especially with youth leaders. And one of the tips we often give youth leaders when they're wanting to see a broader change or put together a team is we say, find a senior adult who can be part of your team. Somebody who's, in their 70s, 80s, whatever age in your church would classify them as being a senior adult. Because we have often found that if you make changes related to young people and then hope an older generation supports them, those changes don't always go well. If you involve an older person's perspective or two early on, it's amazing how that person may share that idea as things are being developed. We have seen older adults actually champion and defend ideas that have been determined or made on behalf of young people because they were part of creating it. People support what they helped to create.
And Jake, as you put together this transformation team, would you actually, let's say you do have a couple of people that are older people, or even whatever they are, whatever
Yep.
demographic they happen to represent, would you tell them, hey, you're here on behalf of others. As we come to conclusion, I need you to champion those things with other people. Do you encourage that?
Yeah, I think is I always depending on the situation, we offer some tools in the book, like how do you think through who is needed. I think we always want to be careful of tokenism, and there are times where tokenism can occur. We tend to find if this is done with a genuine sense of empathy, preparation, you are elevating for this person, and this is where like a little bit of theological or biblical framing goes a long ways. If it's, hey, you're checking this box for us, please join our team. Not how you said it, Dave, but if that's how it's phrased, rarely does that go well. If it's, hey, Corinthians talks about the church as a body. we know the body is not complete until we have all parts represented. We want you to be who you are and come from the perspective that you represent and bring that to the table. Often, if it's framed in that way, yeah, we see things operate in beautiful ways. Now, we don't want to say this is all rainbows and unicorns. There's real conflict that exists. That like we're not detached scholars in that way, Dave. Like we're engaged in the life of ministry, church, and community. We know how messy it gets, but still, we believe that those
I mean,
diverse
and in
teams are
fact, you
better.
probably want healthy conflict.
Yeah, the moment you can stay in healthy conflict, which for many of us, at least given some of my tradition, yeah, we shy away from conflict. Is like, wait, the moment conflict comes about in the church, like, you know, the little Lord Jesus, no crying he makes, which is bad theology, but it is part of it. Like, conflict is okay as long as it's that healthy, productive conflict. Jesus certainly forgave and healed. There's times he's flipping tables there, right? That there's righteous indignation.
Good. Hey, let me real quick. Give me because I'm watching the clock too, but I want to make sure I'm trying to answer some of these questions. David Mills is asking a very particular question about kind of Gen Z, and he's asking how can churches become places where entrepreneurs are seen and valued? His premise is that a lot of Gen Z does have this kind of edge of be more towards entrepreneurial. They like exploration. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And when I think of entrepreneurial, if I can say it, I also think of Jesus. I think Jesus was pretty entrepreneurial and how the disciples led and the early church, et cetera. So we come from a history of entrepreneurial thinking. I actually was doing a bit more research on Blockbuster yesterday, and one of Blockbuster's major weaknesses is they forgot what business they were in. They thought they were in the video store business instead of the entertainment business. And Netflix understood we're in the entertainment business. And as I was been thinking about churches in the last 24 hours even, we tend to think that we're in the business of putting on worship services, offering programs, etc. No, that's not our business. Our business is faith formation and transformation. So what a great opportunity to say to young people who have new ideas, how can we better enact our business of faith formation using technology, not using technology, et cetera. I mean, they're some of our most creative innovators. Now, they definitely need good coaching. So we're not saying turn your church over to 20-somethings and everything will be fine. The ideal is that 20-somethings and people from all generations are ideating together. So yes, Gen Z is entrepreneurial. Let's leverage that and let's rethink a lot of what we're doing.
Hey, while we're on this, I'm going to go real broad, Kara, with you. Suzette's asking this question. Can you give some examples? And so maybe it's some, I don't know if benchmarking is a good word to use or not, that, hey, here's some intergenerational ministries where it's really working. Check out their websites, try to get a hold of those people, find out what they're doing. Are there a few you point to?
Yeah, I actually rather would just tell you a story of a church that I think they're doing something that any church can do or be inspired to do likewise. So it's a church of about 200 people. They wanted to do what we talked about. So they started with listening. A pastor and an elder did 2 focus groups with teenagers and asked the teenagers, hey, when do you most feel part of the church? When do you really feel appreciated, like you belong? And the young people said, we love it when people from the church show up at our events. So the pastor and the elder thought we could do something about it. So they created a Google Doc where families and young people could enter their, basketball, Boy Scout, drama, whatever it might be, events, and youth ministry volunteers started showing up. That went so well that the pastor and the elder thought, gosh, we can actually make this a whole church-wide initiative. So now every Sunday in this church, there's a slide in the worship service that spells out what young people are doing in the next week or two, and people from all ages can come. And you know what? It's often senior adults who come, who have a little bit more time and have a special tenderness with young people. So the pastor who told us the story, he said that he recently went to a 16-year-old soccer game and he looked down the sidelines and there was an 81-year-old sitting there in his lawn chair coming to cheer on the soccer player. So, that church listened and then thought, okay, how do we do a little bit of matchmaking? What structure do we need? Some churches do it by interest. What are young people interested in? What are adults who can help them in that, et cetera? But listening and then thinking about what baby steps can we take and experiments on the margins, like we talked about already.
I'll tell you what, I mean, that alone was worth tuning in. That is just a simple, brilliant, scalable idea that any church, I mean, and even as you're talking about it, because I'm flashing back because I'm thinking about my youngest son, Caleb. He's playing baseball, he's in Little League, and one of his youth workers showed up at the game. I still feel moved thinking about that. And
Yeah.
imagine if that became the value, in your church.
Yeah.
And that is such a great idea.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's totally free. And you know what, Dave? Well, in almost all of our research, we look at how churches or Christ following adults change young people. What we have seen in every study is the direct influence goes the other direction too. So it's not just about what's good for young people. As those of us over 30 invest in those who are younger, we are transformed also. Churches get new vitality and energy. So it's good for everyone.
That's
And
awesome.
Dave, Kara went story. I'm going to go promotion real quick.
Here we
We're
go.
all involved with the 10 by 10 collaboration, which Ray functions as the executive director of. The 10 by 10 collaboration, it's 1010.org. So if people were to go to 1010.org, we have all sorts of stories and examples with even more coming. And part of the reason I wanted to bring this up, not only can people find resources and stories there, but Dave, one of the stories that will be coming out is of a young person who grew up in your church who is now doing youth ministry in all sorts of intergenerational ways. So his story will be featured there and just the awesome work he's doing. So we do want to give a plug for the 10 by 10 collaboration for more of those stories.
That's awesome. That's cool. Hey, Ray. As long as your org's getting the plug there, anything you want to add to that? And then I got a question for you.
No, I mean, I think that there's so much wisdom out, and we're trying to do is synthesize a lot of the wisdom that's out there, so that you don't have to do all the heavy lifting. And so, connect with us if you're able to.
Cool. Hey, David Manifold's got a question here, and he's asking. He says, "Have you noticed a dynamic around staff versus volunteers that leads to effective ministry and mission? Have you noticed that dynamic? Have churches had to staff differently in this framework?" And here's his context while you're thinking about a response. He says, "I'm in a church of about 350 to 400 with 2 gatherings. About 35% of our church is under the age of 25, with a high volunteer culture, but feeling the need for more support staff. We're also in Montreal, Canada." Any reaction to that dynamic there around staff versus volunteers and effective ministry?
Well, Jake already mentioned how much we love the priesthood of all believers. So, I don't have specific data about that. As a researcher, I try to make clear when I have data and when I don't. Jake or Ray, please chime in if you do. I don't have particular data about it, but we do see God work in powerful ways when churches hand the keys to young people. Now, I think a mistake I've made as a leader in the past is I don't train that young person for what I hope they do. I don't coach them well. I just toss the keys in their direction and hope they succeed. And few of us would succeed in that environment. So again, building intergenerational relationships, connecting those of us over 30 to coach and guide a young person who's maybe volunteering, maybe it's a short-term few hour a week role. There's a lot of energy that young people can bring, but they need our investment.
Very good.
Yeah, the one thing I'd probably the one thing I'd add is that you can't treat and assume that staff and volunteers are going to be the same. They're distinct categories of members of the community. But I do find that when staff are able to create space for volunteers to flourish, so much good can happen. And so if that's the posture that staff can take, that actually does some exponential work.
There you go. Nicely done. I don't know who wants to field this one, but I'll throw it out there. Randall came back and he adds, "By the way, all this is gold in all caps." And I would agree. So thank you very much. But he said this specifically: "Any tips on how the church can be more impactful, intentionally focused with the growing challenges of mental health?" And I got the book Anxious Generation just an arm's reach away. I think all of us have seen that. Any specific kind of, I don't know, here's a couple things to keep in mind. Here's a couple things you could do. Here's some best practices. Any comments on that question?
That's a real challenge for all of us. I don't know a family with teenage girls that's not dealing with mental health challenges. The research tells me they exist, but I don't know any, and teenage boys are just a half step behind. So we at the Fuller Youth Institute, if you go to fulleryouthinstitute.org, we have some free as well as low-cost resources on mental health, podcasts for parents, training for you, a brand new mental health field guide to help youth leaders train their volunteers, because it's often the volunteers, the small group leaders, who are really encountering that anxious, depressed, maybe even suicidal young person. So you're absolutely right, Randall. And I would encourage you to go to our website, fulleryouthinstitute.org. I believe it's /mental health.
I know we got just a couple minutes before we wrap up here. Ray, I want to come back to you because I know in the book you give some suggestions for casting a compelling vision. And one of the phrases, and I think maybe I've already heard it kind of in and out of here, is experimenting toward a more fruitful, faithful, and lasting future. Could you kind of talk about what that looks like and how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, we see vivid descriptions of the future from scripture, all throughout, from the beginning of the text to Revelation, and where we see every tribe, nation, tongue, and people, and the coming of the new heavens and the new earth. So it's important to articulate what this compelling vision is in a way that's sticky and memorable, and something that really captures both the head and the heart. Our colleague Scott Cormodo was mentioned earlier, and he talks about the importance of describing. He talks about the importance of how vision is a shared story of future hope, and
Hmm.
so inviting people into a common story, because as humans we find ourselves in stories and use them to make sense of our lives. It's about meaning making, and we're more likely not to change because of thoughts, but because of feelings, and stories really help us tap into those feelings. And so an example that we give is this church called The Dwelling, that really crafted a beautiful, compelling vision. It's a church. It's a church in North Carolina, planted by Emily Norris, and this is the vision. Here are in a world that constantly tells people who are homeless they don't belong. The Dwelling will be a church that tells them that the world has it all wrong, that there is holiness in their identity as someone experiencing homelessness, that they share a kinship with God who reminds us that we are all wanderers in search of belonging that can be found at the table where outsiders are no more. And when you think about that, you're like, I want to be at that table. That's the table I want to sit at, a table where, you don't feel like there are any more outsiders. And she really helped craft a story that people wanted to be a part of, or her and her team did that. And a big part of the way that you do that is through the discernment of the transformation team, which we talked about earlier, and working with people that are invested in the community to help lead and guide the community moving forward.
Hey, Kara, I'm going to give you the last word here as we are coming up on time. Maybe just 20, 30 seconds. Someone's listening, they're loving what they're hearing, but the truth is inside they're nervous about experimenting with new approaches. What would you say in 15, 20, 30 seconds?
Listening and involving others lessens the risk of those experiments. Those two steps are key. Involve others and listen to those you're trying to impact.
Super helpful. I'll tell you what, seriously, Kara and Raymond and Jake, thank you so much. Thanks for the work that you do. Thanks for being a part of this. This was super helpful. For those of you listening in, if you want to take next steps on a couple different things, yes, absolutely go out and purchase Future Focus Church. You can see it, find it anywhere, Amazon, it's everywhere. It's a great read. It'll be super helpful. Visit those websites you've been hearing about for these resources, these tools. We'd also love to have you at Exponential's 2025 national conferences. We will be both in the Chicago area. You can come and see Ray. Ray, you're going to be there, right?
I am now. I
All
will be
right, there
wherever
we
you
go.
are.
I love it. It's it's November 18th and 20th, and we'll actually be out in Naperville. Terrific lineup. I'm telling you, it'll be transformational for you. It'll be a great experience. We'll also be out in Castro Valley, California, October 28th to 30th in the Bay Area there. If you just go to exponential.org/events, exponential.org/events, and if you use the code greater 19, because that's our theme, greater 19, we'll give you $19 off for watching this webinar. All right. Love all you guys. Thank you, panel. And everybody take care, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks.
Thanks so much, Dave.